let's get this out of the way. macOS 10 was a revolutionary operating system released in 2001. It was based on the Next Step Darwin code-based whatever thing from Next, the company founded by our great Lord and Savior, Steve Jobs. The technology would eventually make it into our phones, tablets, smartwatches, and whatever sexually explicit piece of technology you want me to say here, because those are the kinds of jokes you expect me to make on my shows. Now that I'm done with my little keynote speech, I can actually talk about this piece of shit. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Let's Test Operating Systems, where we look at operating systems from the past and present. Today I'm going to talk about macOS 10 Cheetah, the first version of, I guess, modern macOS. Full disclosure, this operating system is before my time, and therefore I never had any experience with it when it was relevant. And you likely didn't either, because it wasn't relevant for very long. Within 6 months of release, it was succeeded by macOS 10 Puma, and in 2002, that system was succeeded by macOS 10 Jaguar. I started collecting vintage computers around the same time I started my first ever YouTube channel, but until around 2017 or so, the oldest macOS I ever got to use was Panther on my iMac G3, and later on my PowerBook G4. And only one of those systems can even run Cheetah. The only system I've had Cheetah on for a long time was my iBook G3 clamshell, and I honestly much prefer looking at the computer than actually using it, with its unfortunately low USB port count of fucking 1. Plus, that laptop is much better suited to macOS 9, which it used to run until I downgraded it to 8.6. That seems to be the general theme of macOS 10 in its first 2 years. It couldn't beat macOS 9 at its own game, so Apple forced it to. WWDC 2002 famously featured a funeral ceremony for macOS 9, which in my opinion is probably the coolest way a company has ever killed off support for a product. Much better than how Microsoft likes to do it. I swear it had a fucking virus or something. Soon after, Apple would start building Macs that were incapable of booting natively into macOS 9, starting with the aluminum PowerBook G4 models in January of 2003. Apple had planned for this though, as all versions of macOS 10 until Leopard in 2007 had support for booting a macOS 9 emulator, so long as you were on a PowerPC Mac, but that's a story for another video. This somewhat solved the issue of actually getting any work done on macOS 10, since developers had to rewrite everything for the entire new code base moving forward. You'd think that would have killed the Mac platform, but Apple had a few aces up their sleeve. First off, classic macOS was an outdated piece of shit that for the longest time would throw a crash if you looked at it funny. Second, macOS 10 and its SDK were made to be developer friendly to make it as easy as possible to create new apps for macOS 10 and or convert apps from OS 9 to OS 10, as well as the software emulator I mentioned earlier. Third and finally, products like the iPod in particular drew people to want a Mac computer because it's Apple, which is the same reason people still buy iPhones today. All of that said, this video exists to answer one simple question. Does macOS 10 Cheetah still hold up? Obviously this isn't a modern OS, so I don't expect it to do modern things, but for the time, was it worth the $129 price tag? We open up with the happiest little guy I've ever seen on a computer screen. Obviously his boot screen is a carryover from macOS 9 and its Happy Mac boot screen that's been present since the original Macintosh, although this icon is slightly different from the macOS 9 variant. Instead of a macOS splash screen like the previous versions, macOS 10 indicates it's loading with a simple next step loading cursor in the corner, which is also present within the OS. Upon first boot, macOS 10 presents you with a welcome video saying welcome in a number of different languages set to some nice music before taking you through the setup assistant, which we won't discuss since I don't talk about the install process in these videos. Once that's over, and about 10 years later, you're dropped onto the desktop. This looks rather familiar. You got the dock, the Apple menu in the corner, and things are mostly in the right places, but there's still some oddities here. First off, there's a whole dock shortcut for display settings. Ew, what is that? Okay, so before I get into that, I will mention that I'm testing the actual launch version of macOS 10, and if I'm being honest, this release version still feels like a beta release. Hell, the first version doesn't even say the version number, it just has the build number on it. I did try 10.0.4 as well, but apparently even fully updated the OS still sucks, so while I did actually test it, I elected not to record any footage of it. Back to the dock though, you have some standard shortcuts that you might expect, like Finder, Mail, System Preferences, piece of shit, but also the display shortcut and the airport shortcut. In fact, now that I think about it, the menu bar looks really fucking bare on the right side. My MacBook Pro has a lot of stuff going on the right side of the notch, and most of them are system setting shortcuts. Oh, also, did I mention the system runs really fucking slow? This is actually a common criticism you'd see back at launch when the reviews were coming out, and I can confirm that this isn't running great. From the moment the Happy Mac appears on boot to the point where the desktop is fully loaded in, it takes 1 minute and 37 seconds, whereas macOS 9 on the same computer takes less than a minute. So it's definitely not a hardware issue. Hell, in a previous video I installed 10.4 on the same computer, and after timing the footage, I got 33 seconds. Really ironic considering the name of the system, Cheetah. On a more positive note, I love Aqua. Aqua is a beautiful user interface and it came from this version. Keep in mind that macOS 10 came out in March of 2001 before Windows XP even shipped. Windows 2000 was still current and it looked like a product of the 90s, probably because it was. Aqua is very colorful, bubbly, and fits in with Apple's branding of the time, as well as the style of the 2000s. The loading bars have a nice flow animation, the icons in the OS look more rounded than a 90s Ford Taurus, and overall this whole operating system looks so visually appealing. Hell, this system did transparency effects years before Windows Vista did it. One thing I can't excuse because of the age of the system is the login screen. Because there's no option to display a list of users, you have to type out your username and password to log into your user account, unless you're set to log in automatically. Windows 2000 and Millennium Edition are the same way, and Windows XP didn't ship until October. That being said though, macOS 9 had a user list. Just saying. Okay, actually, quick correction here. Windows 98 did have a user list that could be enabled in the settings. It's pretty rare to see in action, but it does in fact exist. Unfortunately though, the same can't be said for Windows 2000. Also, I can't put the computer into sleep mode. No, actually, this Power Mac has a stock GPU and macOS 9 has no problems in sleep mode. This shouldn't be an issue. Hey, at least I can drag Windows around without a wireframe. The last major complaint I have with Cheetah is the fact that out of the box there's almost nothing to do. The built-in applications are pretty much the bare minimum. You have internet, mail, and a browser, neither of which really work anymore. Ways to playback existing media on the computer, utilities, and a game of chess. There's no iTunes or iMovie, there's no calendar, no DVD player, and at launch this couldn't even play fucking CDs. It's honestly kind of boring looking, and actually, I almost wish I never decided to cover this. What the fuck was I thinking? So I don't have a whole speech to make like I did at the end of the Windows 10 video, but here's my final thoughts on this OS in particular. 10.0 is kind of a rocky starting point, almost feeling a bit like it's still in the beta stage. Things are kind of there, but they haven't gone all the way with it yet, unfortunately. Also, it runs slow as shit. That's still true. This is probably why Cheetah has piss poor software support, and everything you saw here was just the default stuff the OS came with, which is basically nothing, as I said before. This is really an issue all the way up to Jaguar, because that was when Apple forced developers and customers alike to convert and submit to macOS 10. So no, Cheetah really doesn't hold up particularly well, and it absolutely was not worth the $129 price tag. But I also don't think it shouldn't have been released. Plus, it still had the classic compatibility layer, so if you're running light software, it probably would do just fine with that option alone. Then again, why would you bother if your Mac already has OS 9 installed? Thank you for watching this review of macOS 10 Cheetah, and I'll see you in the night sky. Soon after, Apple would start building Macs that were incapable of booting Fucking hell, I can't get the fucking script right. Soon after, Apple would start... God fucking damn it! Just keep it rolling, keep it rolling. Soon after, Apple would start... I can't fucking do this right now.